Good afternoon. This is another segment of the running history of Memphis, and this afternoon we have some really nice, interesting people on to talk about the early days of running stores. And on the left, Bud Joyner, who's been on before. In the middle, Barry Roberson, who is now owner of Breakaway Athletics, which is also an Owen. And on his right is Chris Stovall, who's worked at a number of running stores in the past. So I'll just kick it off and let you guys start talking about the early days of running stores in Memphis. Bud had the oldest one, I think.
Yeah, I never wanted to be in the retail business. My father owned a hobby shop for 50 years, and I decided I didn't want any part of that business. But the way it all started was you couldn't find running shoes in Memphis. I remember going over to Dowdle, and somehow I'd found an Adidas catalog, and I had 3 shoes that I wanted to buy. I knew my size, I knew the product number, and I was going to give them cash. They wouldn't take the order. And I thought, something's... So at the same time, I was reading a book about currency arbitrage, and the German mark was real cheap, and I thought, hey, buy Adidas shoes. Well, Adidas wouldn't open me up, but I found a sporting goods store in Canada that evidently the Canadian dollar was even stronger than the US dollar against the mark, and I bought I think I ordered 2 dozen shoes from them at about what the wholesale would have been in the U.S. and started selling them out of the trunk of my car. And then it got out of hand.
Which was a green Plymouth Duster.
Green Plymouth Duster, which measured all the road race courses in Memphis for a long time.
That sat in the rear of one measuring. Let's see, but I guess after that, Phidippides was the next one that opened?
Yeah, Phidippides opened on Summer Avenue. And well, let me go back to how I actually got opened a store. After I sold out the Adidas shoes, I was able to, no, I know what happened. I met Dave Ellis at a track meeting. Dave Ellis was the rep for New Balance Shoes, which is a real new shoe company, and running shoe company. And New Balance was the only running shoe company that ever sold widths other than D and E and B. They had 5A to 5E shoes. Plus, if somebody came in with a really weird foot, and I saw a lot of really weird feet, but you could just trace the foot on a piece of paper, mail it to them, they'd make the shoe and mail it back to you.
Nice.
But then, so before I opened the store, I thought, well, the money was in team sales, so I went around to high schools and tried to sell well, I found out early on that you don't want to do that because they want, you to practically give them the shoes, and they're not going to pay for them for about 3 or 4 months, if they ever do. So I had another business that was in a little shotgun house on New York Street, which is a dead-end street off of Central, probably the worst possible retail location. And so I started selling the New Balance shoes, and then later I got Puma, because like somebody said, Puma would open up a service station if they wanted, but Adidas was so particular and so arrogant the whole time I was in the business, the Adidas rep never set foot in my store. He would just come into town and rent a hotel room, extra room in a hotel, and set up all his stuff and send you a postcard. So if you wanted it, But if Adidas had been smart and hadn't been so arrogant, Nike would have never happened. But I guess after maybe a year or two of selling out of the front of a store on New York Street, I had people coming in wanting to back me and move out east. And finally, I partnered with five people, and the idea was to open a store out east, about where we ended up opening one on Poplar. But in the meantime, the Nike rep, Don Dennelsbeck, came to me, and he wanted to open up a store in Bartlett. And we decided to back him in that, which turned out to be a big mistake, because for one thing, we had way too big a store, and the demographics just weren't very favorable for a running store in Bartlett at the time. And then right after we got that open, we opened the store on Poplar, which Chris Stovall managed for me. And if it hadn't been for the store in Bartlett, which really dragged us down, we were the store that Chris ran wasn't much bigger, maybe smaller than the little shotgun house I was in on New York Street. And everybody was coming in saying, you need to move out east. But there was only one person that said, stay where you are, stay in that little house, and that was Dave Ellis. And he turned out to be right.
Kim Johnson was
Kim Johnson was a partner, and he was a lawyer, and he set up it was a limited partnership, and I was the general partner, and Kim and Woods Weathersby, Sandy Frazier, Phil Lieberman, and Chuck Schott were my five partners.
Kim is in one of our segments, one of the early interviews we did, and passed away a little over a week ago.
Yeah, he was on the track team with me at Central High.
At Central High School, and went down to Ole Miss and ran down there, I believe.
Right, and when we did the limited partnership, I had a friend that told me, said, Bud, limited partnership is fine, but you need to incorporate and yourself and the corporation be the general partner, then you're not liable. Well, I didn't listen to him. So I was liable for all the debts, no matter what happened. And after, probably within the first year, interest rates went through the roof, and you could get, 12, 15% on T-notes. And so all my partners started bailing on me. That was another disadvantage of that type of ownership, was the limited partners could at any time say, hey, I want my money back, and you either had to give them their money back or to liquidate the business and give them a pro rata share. But the ironic thing was, even though it was set up by lawyers, if I would have liquidated the business after they put their money in, I would have taken most of their money, and they would have ended up with hardly anything.
Good thinking.
Yeah.
Phidippides was next.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, Phidippides was a chain. And what was the guy's name?
Steve Bledsoe.
Steve Bledsoe was a dentist.
He was only about 24 years old when he opened that store.
Yeah, he should have stuck to dental practice.
Over on Summer Avenue and next to the
Summer Shopping
Mark Twain.
Next to Walgreens.
Yeah, I don't think he lasted a year, and I ended up buying all his inventory. And Freeman Marr, who later owned a store, who was a good friend of mine, told me not to give him. He wanted his cost out of the merchandise. And Freeman said, no, you can get him down to a lot less than that. And I said, well, the way I'm looking at it, I'm buying everything that he sells is profit that I'm not making. So if I take that away from him and he goes out of business, then I've got to come up with the money for the inventory. But that's what I did. I even got somewhere I've got the sign, the Fidipides sign.
Oh, really?
In my garage.
Did you work there, Chris?
No, not for Fidipides.
You worked at Fidipides.
Yeah. I was 18 years old.
Yeah, I think I remember you in the store, but it's a vague memory.
Yeah, it's been a long time ago. It's an interesting place, and there weren't a lot of runners in the area. I was like the only one within a 5-mile radius that ran there. But
people ran, but it was for a different reason back then.
yeah, I chased down a guy that Bob Fisher's music store was next door, and somebody stole a guitar, like a real expensive guitar, out of the window once, and jumped into the drainage ditch behind the summer shopping center. And I chased him down. It's not hard to catch a guy with a guitar. But what I remember was, it was, keep in mind, this was late 70s, and I think we were done by 1980. But since we didn't have the internet and runnersworld.com and everything else.com, Steve had a collection of every running magazine ever printed, every track and field news, every Runner's World, every runner magazine, everything. And so I had plenty of time.
You read that in your spare time, right?
So, well, what I did was I made a index card catalog of knee issue, and then, or training for a marathon, or
I remember that.
training this. Had these index cards, and we had like a library of all these magazines and books, and I had cataloged it all. And then, of course, the internet came, so I guess it's not worth anything today. But
let's see, there were some chairs in there too, weren't there?
oh, we had a seating area, couches and chairs.
I remember that.
We used to have some interesting people that would hang out there. Jerry Vanoy,
Oh, yeah.
Full Moon Fun Runners Club, his sidekick Dave.
Dave is the one that ran off with the money after one of the races he put on.
Oh, it was interesting.
It was a big store too.
You were at a running place.
Yeah, but I started with Bud, of course.
Right.
And the little known thing about Bud, if I can speak, deter from the running, he had a profession of building landscape architect models.
No, just architecture models.
Architecture models of buildings, and you can go in the city hall. I believe his model's still there. You can go in the airport, your model's still there. Just incredible what he could do back then, with the limited skills or media that you have today that he didn't have then. He really produced some nice models.
Computerized.
You couldn't do 3D or print it on a printer or whatever. 3D,
We did it by
3D
hand.
printer.
I remember, since I got off the subject a little bit, I remember we did a model of NBC Bank. In the existing bank building, they put in skylights, and the skylights were little pyramids. They were about maybe that square, but they were like 16 or 20 of them, and they were clear.
Huh.
So we were trying to figure out how to do it. My brother was working for me. Said, "Hell, let's just do it." So he got in there with a saw, sandpaper, nail file, and polished about 20 of these little pyramids on a block of acrylic. Now you do it with a computer, but it wouldn't have been as crisp as this was.
And oddly enough, your dad's, we're off the subject here, but your dad, the DeSoto Hobby Shop,
Right.
in the alley behind Crest 5 and 10 store, I've spent many a $1 back in there in the day, and I watched you. That's the first time I'd ever seen you, and later on, it's funny how we make these connections in Memphis, but he was making balsa wood models and with the glue and stuff, and of course, to me, that was fascinating, because the only thing I could make anything that didn't look like anything. My plane would end up a ball. So I finally ended up collecting stamps. That was, and you had stamps in there.
Yeah, stamps and coins.
Coins, yeah.
A couple of the other customers that were, I guess, about 10 or 12 years old at the time were John Fry, who did Ardent Studio, and Freddie Smith.
An
The last
interesting
time I saw
clientele.
Freddie Smith, he was that tall. He barely got his head over the counter. And he and John Fry built model trains.
But,
Interesting. Anyway,
Yeah, I appreciate that, Bud. It was fun working. I started off in the store on New York Street. I learned a whole lot from Bud. And then, like Barry, I would look at the running magazines. And so that's when he decided to open the store on Poplar, which of course I managed. I was always interested how Bud would come in every evening and get that cash.
Or send my wife in.
Isn't the wife come out and just go out the door real quick? But it was funny. Barry can appreciate this. I built a shower in the space that we leased in the bathroom. I built up on a wood platform, tied the drain into the existing drain. You remember that, Barry?
I remember.
I remember, yeah, that was great.
And I would go run with the track team from Memphis State, or run behind them at that time. And I had a part-time worker that would be there in the store while I would run, come back, take a shower. There was other runners that came and took showers. So it was kind of neat having a shower. I actually got the shower from Mike Cody from his office. Went down there, I think Mike Ison, a friend of mine, helped me pull the shower out of where his office down on the courts. I don't know if he's still there, but then we moved the shower into the Joyner Sports. And Bud, you might want to talk about your logo. I made the sign for Bud at one time. Do you still have that sign? The brown one with the stripes, pinstripes, and
No.
the silhouette of the runner. You never did tell me who the runner was in that silhouette.
Okay, it's really interesting because I was going to have a contest to see if anybody could identify the runner. Well, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I was looking through running magazines to get the silhouette of the runner, and it was actually a female runner. You can't tell because the way she's turned or something, you can't see her breast, but I can't even remember who it was. It was just a small picture about that big, and the image was about that big.
Rosie Louise, what's the
No.
Boston Marathon runner?
Yeah, Rosie Ruiz.
the half marathon
Yeah,
runner.
that jumped in the Boston Marathon.
But there were two factors that prompted the timing of when I got out of the business. Chris had decided to go back to school, and I have to explain the Nike Futures program. Nike had this program when they started getting popular that you would have to order 6 months in advance so they could do the order and get it back from Taiwan or wherever, and you were stuck with it. Well, it worked out fairly well, except there was a pretty popular men's shoe that had the women's equivalent, but the women's equivalent was this horrible color, and it just didn't. It was kind of like a men's version. They didn't really scale it to a woman's foot or something. Plus, when I got them in, I realized that the sizing was way off. There's what you call the gut sizes, and for women, that's like 6 to 8 would be the
Well,
gut
it's
size.
moved up nowadays.
Yeah, probably has.
Yeah, we're kind of like 7.5 to 9.5.
So if you look at a bell curve, you're at the top of the bell curve. Most of your shoes will be in that gut size, and as it goes down to the smallest and largest sizes, well, this completely messed up the size run, and I sold out of the gut sizes because the gut sizes happened to be, 9, 10, 11, which you ordered less of. And I kept those shoes for, I bet, 3 years. And at the time that Chris said he was going to go back to school, a company it was a department store in Indiana, contacted me, I don't know how, wanting to buy every Nike shoe I had, regardless of what it was, at cost. I said, well, I know how I can get rid of these Nike women's shoes. So I sold them those plus, everything else Nike, and then had a going out of business sale.
Then you drive your duster to the place where you sold the Nike shoes?
I thought you kept SL80s until the
The SL80s was an interesting story.
to the 90s.
SL80s were the Adidas every year to commemorate the Olympics. They had first started off with the SL72 for Munich, and then 76 for Montreal, and the SL80s for Moscow. And we never ordered any of them. But John Mahundro, who was the best runner in town, saw him in the Adidas catalog, and he had an outfit when he raced that was blue and white, and the SL80s were white with blue stripes. So he said, would you order me a pair of those? So I ordered John a pair of those. So people saw him running, so they'd come in and say, would you order me? So I'd order. So finally, I started stocking them. And about maybe 6 months before I went out of business, Adidas had 14, they were closing them out. They had 1,400 pairs, and the price was just, incredibly low. And I said, I'll take them all, because I was going to do that going out of business sale, and I thought I could get rid of all of them. I ended up with maybe selling 1,000 of them. Before I closed the store. And
Yeah,
then
I went
after
through.
that, I practically had to give them away.
I ended up with about 5 pairs, so thanks a lot.
And people, some people would buy a case of them, 20 to a case.
Yeah, right. The good shoe. Barry?
Getting back to, you're talking about the sizing of shoes. I don't know if you guys remember, but it was in the late 70s, the women's waffle trainer they made in like 6 different countries. And every one of them was different.
That's the one.
Yes,
That's
every
the
one of them
That's
was
the one.
sized different. So
Exactly.
literally anybody, now you get people that might be in between a 7 and a 7.5. Well, you could get them a 7 1/4,
Right.
7 1/8. But you had to know which country fit like what.
Right, look on the box.
So, that's one of those really important things that I've known in my life. That
And there was no guidance. The first time I saw a recommendation for a size run, I believe it was ASICS, but they had a recommended size run for 50 shoes. And they had just come out with a shoe I thought was going to be a pretty good shoe. And I ordered 100 pair, which would be 2 size runs. And in the size, in 2 size runs, there were 2 pair of size 12s. Okay. I got the shoes in. I was unpacking them. Woods Weathersby and Kim Johnson walked in the store. Both size 12s. They bought both size 12s.
Lucky. A lucky break for the day.
It's really neat, Barry, how the running shoe has evolved over the years. You mentioned where you could do a tracing and then make the shoe. Excuse me. I think now, and Barry, I'm not involved as much as Barry with the current market or the design of the shoes, but I think eventually, with the way computers are in the modern age, that you'll be able to take a mold of your foot somehow, computer scan or whatever, and they'll make that exact shoe a shoe for you that fits your foot. And I learned a lot about shoes over the years. I'm trying to think, between the 3 of us, how many retail stores we were associated with. Bud, you had Joyner Sports. Barry, you had Fidipides.
I worked at Dowdle's.
Okay.
Who had no interest in running shoes. They told me I was nuts when I suggested they put them in their stores. And let's see, Dowdle's, Fidipides, Athlete's Foot, and this breakaway place.
I had Joyner Sports, Athlete's Foot, Fleet Feet, Running Place, 4. So I had the keys to 3 different running stores at one time.
Well, and you worked at Ralph's place
Oh, for 2 weeks, filling in for my good friend Mark Edwards at Roadrunner Sports on Winchester, near the old Americana Club.
And that's another one I ended up buying his inventory when he closed.
Yeah, I'd like to
ins and outs of
just
that.
say, Bud, without a doubt, is the father of Memphis running. When I started running, there was no running information. There was nowhere to find anything. I don't know how I got lucky and found out he even existed, but I mean, I remember going in his store and it was like going into heaven because there were like running shoes on the wall and a guy
All over the floor,
that
too.
loved running, that knew all about it. And actually, Bud's who got me excited about running. Being in his store, I met John Mahundro in that store one afternoon, Saturday afternoon. He had just run in the open division in the 10,000 at a Southwestern track meet and had won in a time I couldn't even fathom. It was like 31 minutes, and I thought, I don't even know if I can run 5 miles in that time. But I mean, most things that got me excited about running came from Bud. He was kind of the mentor to so many of us.
But then,
well, yeah.
then Breakaway opened up, and you were there pretty early too, weren't you?
I was there when we opened. I was a senior at Memphis State. There was no university yet. And Mike Cody, Jack Rocket, Bill Craddock were the main three. We had Frank White and Dr. John Nash and Michael McLean also involved. But they called me, and I was going to school literally. I mean, Bud's thing was, I always loved being in the store. All I wanted to do was get a job, make money, and someday open a running store. When I was a senior, these guys came and said, hey, we want to open a store. Would you run it for us and set it up? And I did. And I said, sure, because that's what you do, right? You don't know what you're doing, and you just learn it as you go, and that's kind of what we did. And
Did you live above it?
I did. We were at Union and Belvedere, and one of the last big houses left on Union, and I lived upstairs with Steve Roberts, who was also at one point, he was the guy I tried to like see him and catch up to him just like I did Chris and some other people. Well, I remember one of the first races I ran was Memphis and May 10K, and you ran, and my goal was, that guy's, he owns a running store. I just need to try not to get too far behind. But
I ran 35 minutes in that race, so
I think,
that was my best I ever ran.
wow, I think that was my second race. First race was the marathon you put on out
Yeah,
at the
Barry.
Pill Farm.
You were what? How old were you when you ran that?
I think like 18 or 19.
A child.
I didn't know what I was doing. My long run was 12 miles. And I didn't realize you're supposed to run like longer. But I'd read the word in Runner's World, and marathon sounded really cool, which is I think still the attraction for a lot of people. They can't grasp 26.2. But yeah, I tried to do it.
But I found the results of that marathon, and I think there were maybe 50 finishers, and Barry was the last finisher. But if you took Barry's time, the club in their newsletter, they publish marathon times of anybody that's a club member that runs anywhere in the country. And Barry's time in that race, where he was last, would beat about 99% of the times people in the track club now are running.
What was your time?
Probably 340 or something like that.
I think it was better than that. I was thinking it was. You know,
It was literally, it was like in the 20s. It had dusted snow and ice.
Right. Yeah.
And it was the old Penal Farm route that you went out
I helped out.
I was
with that
there.
race.
far, yeah, and came back and went down to the old barn on the other side of Farm
Right.
Road. And then you turned around, came back, and then you got to do it again. And it was windy, and I had never run that far, never run in the cold, I never drank on the run. And I didn't know what I was doing, so when I got there, in those days, they gave patches a lot for races. And Brandon Davis and somebody else had these jackets, which is a bunch of patches. And I thought, I'm just going to tuck in behind those guys because they look like they know what they're doing. And I did. And I'm running along, and at 20 miles, I'm thinking, man, this isn't really that big a deal. And I never drank on the run, so I spilled a lot of water that froze on my old gray sweatsuit I had on. And I learned to stop and walk. Well, at 23 miles, I'll never forget, I stopped to drink my water. And I'm thinking everything's good. This marathon thing's no big deal. Then my legs wouldn't work when I tried to start back running. And that last 3 miles was the longest week of my life. And I'd asked my parents not to come because I didn't know how I would be at the end, and I didn't necessarily want them to see me. And worse, I thought, well, what if I don't finish? But my dad had this little Ford pickup truck with a topper, and thank God he did, because I had a little MGB manual shift, and I couldn't bend my legs. I couldn't have done the clutch. So I had to lay down like a corpse in the back of that car to go home, and I was really glad they were there.
Was that in February?
Yeah.
January.
January.
It was a guy, Gallagher from Boston won it. I mean,
Yes.
224, which is one of the fastest.
Terry
times.
Bishop ran it. I came out to pass out orange slices for somehow or another, and Terry finished. And I remember him. The wind had been so ferocious that when he finished, he keeled over, fell over almost on his face, caught himself.
But I'm like Barry. My first marathon, I was dead last. It was at Jackson, Tennessee,
Oh, yeah.
and about 18 miles on in, there was a guy that was sweeping the course, and he was driving along beside me singing, "Don't you want to quit? Don't you want to quit? Don't you want to quit?" Because he wanted to go home. He was going to give me a ride back, and I swore that I was never going to run that far again, but I wanted to finish a marathon, so I did. But I ended up running one more marathon.
Where was the first marathon in Memphis? Was it on President's Island?
No. It was supposed to be on President's Island, but Brandon Davis said that the bank would, he was working for a bank, and they would give us some sponsorship money. So
Union Planners, if I remember right.
no, that was Union.
Well, that was a series.
That was a series.
Right. Brandon was.
We moved it there, and it's interesting if you try to lay out a marathon course. There's one thing that you absolutely cannot do. You cannot cross a railroad track, because there's no way that you can have that train stop or rely on any kind of schedule that they're on. So that's why the marathon were part of the first road race series, which started with 10K and went all the way up through 30K, and then the marathon. But it was not a marathon; it was two marathons.
Right, November and October or January.
Yeah, I guess I ran the first one, and Kim Johnson was running about 70 miles a week, but he was only running 10 miles a day. And he beat me pretty badly in the 10K, but at about 20 miles of the marathon, I think my grandmother could have beat Kim into the finish line. It just, you got to experience that, distance to know what it's going to be like.
Absolutely. Well, let's get back to the running shoe stories.
Yeah, right.
Running stories. Running stories are endless. But what others were there? Were there any others?
Richard Casey's store.
And his was named.
Oh yeah, but you had one out in Germantown for a little bit.
Yeah, well, what we did a pop-up store. I knew I was going out of business, so to get more places to get rid of stuff, Richard ran this pop-up store for 30 days before Christmas in Germantown. So we were selling everything at cost. So Richard, not realizing that the reason he was doing so well is selling so much stuff out there, he thought he was a great salesman. And so after that, he opens up his own store. But it's a little harder to sell stuff when you're trying to sell it retail with a markup to make a profit.
Well, what was the name of the store?
Probably had running in it.
Yeah.
So that memory cell is gone in our brains, isn't it?
Yeah.
When I worked at the running place, I lived in the back, and some other running buddies would live upstairs. Eddie Raposo ran track, and I'm trying to think.
Did Mark live there?
Mark
Ken
lived there.
Bennett.
Kenny Bennett, yeah.
Who's known in Memphis now for his works with the
Streets
Ministries. He lived upstairs, but I would work at the running place and then go walk home to the back room.
Well, Freeman Marr came into the store after it was closed, and Chris wasn't there, and opened, for some reason, the door was open to Chris's room, and Freeman panicked because he thought somebody had robbed the place. It was it was so chaotic in Chris's room.
Speaking of that, I was actually robbed, or in the running place when it was robbed. Barry talking about chasing someone when they did a robbery or stealing something. These three gentlemen came in, and one of them distracted me over in the corner, and they grabbed all these expensive warm-ups, and they ran out the door, and dummy me followed them. I thought I was going to be a hero. So they ran and got in the car, and I jumped in the back seat, and I grabbed the keys out of the ignition and threw them down. And then they started running across the parking lot, and I pursued them. And one of them said, "Get the gun." That's when I stopped.
Oh, God.
And I had pushed the alarm button for the police, which I thought was the right thing to do. But apparently you're only supposed to push that button when there's an armed, quote, armed robbery. And the police got mad at me for pushing the button.
Oh, God.
There's cops everywhere in front of the running place, which that building is no longer in existence.
Right.
It's been flat.
on
And it was
Highland,
a small. It was a small. How many square feet was it?
Oh, God. You're right. It was probably the same square, a little bit smaller than a store in Poplar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think Barry, you found that smaller stores are better, aren't they?
Yeah, the smallest you can make work is the way to go.
Barry has quite a history with the running stores. Of course, Philippides and then Breakaway. But you had stores in Bartlett and Germantown, correct?
Yeah, well, and I was actually not involved in the Breakaway Bartlett store. I think it was one of those limited runs there. But yeah, we've had, when we originally opened at Union and Belvedere, Jack Rocket happened to live in Germantown, which I wasn't very familiar with at the time, but thought we needed a store out there, and we didn't have an email list. We had a snail mail list where you would have the labels printed and bulk mail and put them on this thing in envelopes and things like that and send things out. And our second biggest zip code, besides Midtown, which is where the original store was Germantown. So we opened a new store out there, and I guess there's been a Breakaway out there ever since. It's moved around 2 or 3 times. And, I moved it next to the Wolf River it's about 7 years ago. And we like that. It's right next to the paved Germantown Greenway, and we have the dirt trails, and then Shelby Farms right next to it. And Germantown has done a great job for walking and running. They have lots of pedestrian lanes. They've done a great job with Wolf River Boulevard. But in Midtown, we've moved around a little bit. We're in Overton Square now, which cool place. I'm not sure they know what to do with the running store, but it's good because we like beer and we can go a lot of places. But
Yeah, what's that T-shirt say?
famous Rod Dixon quote: "All I want to do is train hard and drink beer."
Well, on the 5 Mile Classic T-shirt, does it not have the initial CB? Cold beer?
Well, it actually says cold beer.
Oh, it says so.
It's
Yeah,
called
but it
Barry.
says
And
cold
the
beer.
initials of Barry Hood and Jack Rocket and
Every runner who's
Dick Clinton,
Mark
Jack,
Edwards.
Mark Edwards, yeah.
and
all have
Roy
passed away
Horton.
over time.
and Jack Marlowe.
Jack Marlowe.
Jack Marlowe,
Exactly.
yeah.
That's a
Yeah, the
good job,
numbers,
guys.
they're heading up now. Pretty soon
Five
there'll
Mile
come a
Classic?
time when there'll be nothing but
Yeah, we're gonna have an addendum
Initials
to
on
the
it.
T-shirt just for everybody.
That was my first race, the 5 Mile Classic. I ran it in '73, I believe. Was that the first time it was run? In '73?
Oh, no. Well, they might not, I remember the first time it was called the 5 Mile Classic, but it had been going on since the 1950s, and maybe earlier than that. The YMCA put it on, and there was the only race in Memphis for a long time. I remember I was walking through Overton Park, and I saw this guy I went to high school with who wasn't on the track team or anything, and he had just run a 5-mile race, and I was real impressed, and that's when I decided I'd start doing distance running. But it took me a while before I got to the 5 Mile Classic.
Yeah, but I think it's advertised as 45. This is the 45th one.
The 44th this year.
44th this year.
And
so
that goes back from when Shields Hood and his fraternity at Memphis State took it over, I guess.
Yeah, from the Y.
Yeah.
From the Y.
Because we don't know much about the history before that.
And getting back to the running shoe stores, it was really neat. I think Freeman might have started. Who started the tradition of having drinks at the end of the race that was a running shoe store?
that was Freeman.
I think Freeman
That
started
was a
taking.
card table.
Right,
And
yeah.
him
I
and-
thought that was very interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
A good retail move.
And-
That's how I met him.
And let me tell you a story about Freeman and Nike. Well, when Don Dennelsbeck and another guy with the Nike reps took me to lunch at Paulette's and bought me about 3 or 4 glasses of wine. And they were nice guys, and I didn't think much of the Nike shoes, but they were such nice guys, and they bought me all that wine. So I agreed to be a Nike dealer. Freeman, when he wanted to get open with Nike, he had to threaten to sue them. They weren't going to open him up.
And he would have.
He would have.
And could have.
And he would have won.
And he would have won.
He would have
In
won.
Bartlett anyway. And I'm sorry we never didn't get Freeman on tape, on video.
But Freeman was the first guy I knew that was running in Masters track meets. The first one was on the West Coast, and I remember Freeman going out there and getting medals in I think 3 events. And I remember going to Raleigh, North Carolina with Freeman once or twice. But one of the funny stories was Freeman would always like to cut it close and just fly in and do the meet and fly out. Well, one meet I wasn't with him, but he was by himself, and so the plane was late, and he realized it was going to be really close before his main event. So he started hitchhiking, and the guy picked him up. He told him where he's going. He says, "Yeah, I'm going right past there." So Freeman was looking at his watch, and Freeman realized, man, this is still cutting it too close. I got to get my running clothes on. He jumped in the back seat of the car, and it started pulling down his pants just when the guy looked in the back seat and said, "What are you doing?" And Freeman says, "Just keep driving." The guy did.
As an aside to all of this, it's 2017. I know the videotape, who knows when they're going to watch it or somebody will watch it, but Breakaway is sponsoring the Classic this year. It'll be, it's been moved from early August to November 26th this year. And Bill Rogers, Boston Bill Rogers, is going to be here. They brought him in to highlight the running #1 and his book #2 and the Classic #3. So it'll be a great weekend for running in Memphis with the Classic again.
Well, after Frank Shorter started his running clothing line, Bill Rogers started one, and I ordered a bunch of rain suits from Bill Rogers and got them in, and all the other rain suits had hoods on them, but Bill Rogers didn't. So I called up and said, where are the hoods? And I talked to some lady, and she said, Bill Rogers doesn't wear hoods in the rain. So that was that, you know.
How about
probably
Frank Shorter ran for the first time. He wore tights in the 10K at Overton Park.
Yeah, the
Liberty Bowl.
So-called
Liberty Bowl,
Yeah, he said, is that true? The first time he ever wore tights?
Well, he was staying with Herb Moriarty, and it turned colder in the night, a lot colder than the weatherman had predicted. And Herb said, "I've got some tights you could wear." And Shorter said, "I'd never wear tights on my legs in a race." Well, he got to Overton Park and started warming up, and he went back to the car and said, "Herb, I hope to hell you brought those tights, and so that was the first race he ever ran with tights on.
Yeah, I experienced Barry talking about ice on his, all over him, on his sweatshirt, ice on my beard.
Yeah,
when I ran that race.
Yeah, I remember a lot of guys coming in with beards
very
iced
cold.
up.
Strange aside to that race, though, was that not the one that Margaret Bruce set the American?
She did. She set an American
women's
record. American
32
record.
I had no
something.
idea.
Yep.
Yeah.
Holy
And
cow.
Frank Shorter came back to run the 5 Mile Classic, I don't know, what, 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And somebody introduced me to him, and he said, Joyner? Well, it turns out that I was his first customer. He had announced the line, and Dave Ellis was actually the rep for the line, and they were going to premiere the line at the Atlanta big trade show. Well, I was flying to Edmonton to watch a friend of mine, Paul Bannon, run the Commonwealth Games Marathon, but I had a layover in Denver of about an hour. So I rented a car and drove to, where was his place? What's the
Boulder.
Boulder. He was in Boulder. Drove to Boulder. Shorter wasn't there. There was one guy in the warehouse. And so I put in an order, and because I was there and everybody else was waiting to do it in Atlanta, I was the first customer.
You remember the name.
And he remembered the name.
Well, I guess we're about right out of time now. It's 4 o'clock, so I know Barry needs to get back to his shop breakaway, and everyone else is going to have to get about their business. But I appreciate you guys coming in. We'll probably be seeing y'all again.
We could probably do this for 10 years.
Probably for 10 years. 10 years.
It would make it take longer than the
Yeah, running
actual things
stores.
took.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. Well, that's all we got